fellow countryman, Marcel Dikken, who has recently joined CLUL as senior researcher with a SEC contract. So he's here since the 1st of October and will be with us for 6 years. So there's plenty of opportunities to start collaborating with Marcel. And well, I'm not, I think most of you actually know Marcel Dikken from his multiple work on syntactic theory. So I'm not going into the details of his CV, but I would say that he can be described very briefly as a very experienced and all-round theoretical syntactician who has extensively published on a wide range of topics. So I would actually say that I dare say that probably there will be some kind of connection with the work of the people here developed at CLUL, at least when it's worked on in the field of syntax. Yes, so Marcel even published on serial verb construction, which is not a very obvious topic, so that really gives an idea of the range of topics he has addressed throughout his career. Marcel has also worked on many languages, of course mostly from a theoretical point of view, but I think the most prominent languages in his work are Dutch, English, Hungarian of course, also because of his connection to Hungary, Mandarin, Rotuman, which is an Austronesian language, but I noticed from his CV, I hope I noticed it correctly, that Portuguese is not among these languages. No. So I really hope that your presence at CLUL will be a way to bring about new synergies between you and other members of CLUL. So at some point you get some references on your CV related to Portuguese, and we get some references on our CV related. We say Marcel Dikken. That seems like a fair deal.
This seems like it.
So yeah, I'm going to give the floor to Marcel, who is going to talk about this very long title on the derivation and density of successive-cyclic A-bar filler gap dependencies. Thank you very much for accepting
yeah.
the invitation to be here with us.
And thank you very much for making the invitation. I have worked on Portuguese just once, but that was Brazilian Portuguese, and it was with a co-author who spoke Brazilian Portuguese. So there is indeed no complete lacuna in my CV when it comes to Portuguese, but you wouldn't have known because I think Portuguese is not mentioned in the title. I'm very pleased to be here. First, in your midst here today, and it's very nice to see so many of you, actually so many of you in this talk. But I'm also very pleased to be in your midst in a different way for those 6 years that Jack talked about. If everything goes well, I will indeed be here for 6 years. And that is a tremendous privilege. I am very grateful to the Portuguese taxpayers for giving me this opportunity. You are all Portuguese taxpayers, most of you at least. And so you have given me this opportunity, and I'm grateful to you. I will show my gratitude. And indeed, I am going to be available to you, so whenever you want to talk about something, anything at all, you will usually find that there is some connection with my work, because I have worked on just about any topic in syntax and its interfaces with morphology, phonology, and semantics. So there's usually something that you can talk to me about, not just this. But today I'm going to be talking about this, which is indeed a mouthful, especially the last part of the title, successive-cyclic A-bar filler gap dependencies. So to ease you into that, I'm going to give you a very simple start, which should be something that all of you can relate to, and then for some of you it will perhaps at some point get a little bit more difficult, but I'm trying to A, keep it short, and B, keep it understandable to everybody, and it's not super technical at all. So, A-bar dependencies between a filler and a gap are found in sentences such as, what did you eat? Or what did John eat? Or long distance filler gap dependencies in sentences like, what do you think that John ate? These are called long-distance filler gap dependencies because there's a filler, what, there's a gap, which we know how to postulate because 8 obviously needs a direct object. There is no direct object following 8, so there must be a gap there. That gap is linked to what, and that forms a dependency. It's a filler gap dependency, and it's a long-distance dependency because there's a closed boundary in between. Yeah? We call this a long-distance filler gap dependency, more particularly in A bar. Long-distance filler gap dependency, the A bar type, has to do with the fact that we are not dealing with a movement or argument movement, but movement to an A bar or operator position. So now you know what this whole mouthful stands for. This is an example. What do you think that John ate? And as some of you may know, especially those of you whose history in the field goes back 4 decades or more, some of you have a history that goes back pretty much more than 4 decades. Those of you who have that history or have read about it will know that there were times, and I have to actually say there were times, not there was a time, but there were times, there were 2 different points in time during that history when these long-distance filler gap dependencies were analyzed, as in the structure at the bottom of this slide. Well, you start out here. Obviously you have to start out here because this is where what gets its thematic role. It's an argument of 8. Then what moves short distance to the edge of the VP of the lower clause. It moves short distance again to the edge of the lower clause. Then it moves to the edge of the matrix VP, and then it moves on to its final resting place, and it gets spelled out there. There were 2 points in history of in the history of generative syntax in which this happened. 2 points not intimately temporally connected. One was 1986. Chomsky's book Barriers, and one was 2001, Chomsky's paper Derivation by Phase. At those 2 points, these derivations held. The labeling of these 2 nodes was different at the time. It was a big VP in 86, it was a little VP in the year 2001, but that needn't concern us. What these 2 proposals by Chomsky have in common is that the WH phrase cycles its way up the tree successive-cyclically via a succession of very small steps. Yeah? That was a theoretical proposal, yeah, in both cases, both in 86 and in 2001. There were empirical concerns, but what may surprise you is that there was actually relatively little discussion of these intermediate steps at the empirical level. This was assumed to be necessary for theory construction purposes. There was, and there still is, a sizable literature on so-called morphological reflexes of successive cyclic movement. And so I don't want to turn that into a bagatelle. There certainly is a literature on this, but what is interesting is that that voluminous literature has not actually managed to motivate all of these intermediate representations of the WH phrase. There is solid motivation for some of these things and not for others. Yeah? So it has never been the case. Never. Yeah, you can take it from me. I'm not lying. Yeah? I'm not Donald J. Trump, for example. So you can take it from me that it is true that there was never a time at which all of these intermediate positions were empirically supported. Yeah? There was never a time. Yeah? Now, Chomsky recently wrote another piece. This is his most recent piece of linguistic writing. He circulated it earlier this year. It is sometimes called the Miracle Creed paper because the expression the Miracle Creed is in the title. Don't ask me why. I know what the term the Miracle Creed comes from. I also know what scientist is associated with it. But that's all neither here nor there. What Chomsky is doing there is definitely not what you might expect from the title. But there is certainly, from the perspective of Chomsky's own history, a bit of a miracle in that paper. Yeah? So what happens in the 2024 paper, the Miracle Creed paper, is that all of a sudden the derivation of so-called successive cyclic long-distance A-bar movement is reduced to this. These are summarily discarded. There are no more intermediate copies of the WH phrase in those 2 positions, and nor, in fact, is there long-distance movement involved. That may surprise you the most. What Chomsky proposes in the 2024 paper is that what moves from here to here, end of story. Yeah? But that is obviously is not where what is pronounced. What is supposed to be pronounced here? So what happens? We will go through that in a moment, but the thing that I want you to take away for now, before we move to the next slide, is that Chomsky is thinning out the more or less traditional densely successive cyclic derivation of long-distance A-bar filler gap dependencies, such that two of the perfectly well-known and reasonably well-loved intermediate positions, especially this one. This is a very well-loved intermediate position under long-distance A-bar movement. Those go out the window. Yeah, bear in mind that that's what happens. It happens not on an empirical basis, but on a fairly hazy theoretical basis, which has to do with this slide, which I will mostly gloss over. This is Chomsky's discussion about control phenomena in the mirror concrete paper. The only thing that I want you to look at is this, 4b. Yeah. 4a is grammatical. Many people praise many people, where the two groups of many people are different. Yeah? One set of many people praises another set of many people. Importantly, 4b is ungrammatical. If it were grammatical, it would mean many people praise themselves. Yeah? Now, you can say many people praise themselves, but you cannot say many people praise, making that mean many people praise themselves. Yeah? Many people praise themselves is grammatical, but if you want to have that reflexive interpretation, you have to actually have something overt in the object position. You cannot have a silent copy of many people in the object position of praise. Chomsky wanted to rule that out once and for all. You might say it had already been ruled out by Chomsky many, many years before by the theta criterion, but the theta criterion was dropped in the minimalist program. Yeah? For reasons that were actually partly sound. But if the theta criterion is out, then you'd still need to explain why many people praised cannot have the interpretation of many people praise many people. And it took Chomsky a while to finally figure that out. He figured it out in 2024. He said, this is ungrammatical because if many people were to raise into this position, that would be an instance of internal merge, or as you might know it, an instance of movement. Yeah? And when something moves, after it's moved, it's put in a box. Yeah? It's put in a box, and that thing in the box is completely inaccessible to the grammar. Yeah? So nothing can be done to it. It cannot be moved further, but it can also not be assigned a thematic role. So when something undergoes internal merge into a derived position, like many people has done here, then in the landing site it cannot receive a theta role. Yeah? This is something that is actually dear to my heart. This is in a way what the theta criterion always wanted to achieve, and it is what the movement theory of control so emphatically threw out. But this is now back. Yeah? So there is no such thing as movement to a theta position. There cannot be, because once you've moved, you cannot receive a theta role. Yeah? That's why 4b is out. So here's the background to what I'm about to say now about long-distance A-bar filler gap dependencies. Once something has moved or has undergone internal merge, it is put in a box, is no longer accessible to the grammar. So now, back to what do you think that he saw, the long-distance filler gap dependency. This is Chomsky's example, or who do you think that he saw? I had, what do you think that he ate? Now I have here, who do you think that he saw? Both have the same property, namely a long-distance A-bar filler gap dependency. How do we derive that? Chomsky says, you move once from this position, WH1, to this position, WH2, which is on the edge of the embedded verbal domain. At that point, WH2 is put in a box, is inaccessible to further grammatical manipulation, so it cannot move on. No further movement happens, therefore. So you build the rest of the structure until you get to the interrogative complementizer CQ. C sub Q is the interrogative complementizer of the matrix clause. You want that C head to make sure that this thing that it builds is actually a question, so there needs to be an operator in the spec of C sub Q. That operator will have to be what? Yeah. How does CQ know that it is what that is in its specifier? Well, that's because C sub Q establishes a copying relationship with the features of WH2. WH2 is in a box, but its features are still there. Of course, they haven't evaporated, so C sub Q can establish a form-copy relationship with the features of what? Then those features land in the baggage of C sub Q, and C sub Q can externalize the WH phrase in its own specifier, yeah, in its backyard, so to speak, and that's how what eventually gets pronounced. Yeah? That's summarized in 1 through 5. Yeah? This is a faithful rendition of what Chomsky proposes. Now mind that this was proposed based on certain assumptions that Chomsky desired to have, mostly on the basis of his convictions about control. Yeah? And it was the control discussion, especially also the fact that you cannot say many people praised on a reflexive reading, that led to what he calls the box theory. I'm not kidding. Yeah? Honestly. You might think that someone who would say Chomsky just proposed the box theory was kidding, but no, this is really the box theory. This is what Chomsky himself calls it. So, given the box theory, there literally cannot be successive cyclic movement. Yeah? You move once, end. Yeah? If it turns out that the first move that you make is extremely far away from the place where you're externalized, then something else needs to happen. And Chomsky certainly proposes what needs to happen. Yeah? He has this copying relationship between C sub q and the low WH. That is an operation, by the way, that is not a syntactic operation, because if it were, it would violate the box theory. And because it's not a syntactic operation, it is also not sensitive to syntactic boundaries, such as the intermediate CP. What this copying relation is, honestly, search me, I don't know, but it is something that allows C sub q to gain access to those features. I'm always having a hard time keeping a straight face when I'm talking about this. But nonetheless, it's a serious proposal. We need to investigate it. Is there an empirical side to this? Well, there is, obviously. There are 3 important takeaways from 6. First, the WH phrase does not get to spec of CP in the matrix clause via movement. In fact, it doesn't get to any spec of CP via movement. A WH phrase never gets to spec CP. Yeah? It never gets to spec CP. It can't move there. It can only be externalized there after C sub q engages in a copying relationship with a bunch of features, but it cannot move to spec of CP. Perhaps with the exception of highest subject dependencies. Those might be in a separate box, if you will. B, there is no copy of the WH phrase.
May I just ask a clarification
Yeah.
question? Even like in simple questions,
Yeah.
like
Exactly.
who died, there
Yeah.
would not be movement. It would
That's a highest subject question. That might be amenable to movement, but who died aside, what did you eat is already not amenable to movement. Yeah? There is movement, but not to spec CP. Second, there is no copy of the WH phrase either on the edge of the embedded CP or on the edge of the matrix VP little vp. Yeah? There is a copy of the WH phrase in the lower clause on the edge of the VP, but not in the matrix, so that there are these 2 phrases missing. And finally, the copy on the of the WH phrase on the edge of the embedded little VP results from terminal movement to that position. Terminal movement of a particular kind. It is terminal movement of the object shift or scrambling type. Yeah? Object shift and scrambling are operations that target the edge of the VP. They have a certain profile. I'll come back to that. This will be important. But bear in mind that that for Chomsky is the only thing that the WH actually can do, coming from an object. Now, I agree with Chomsky on one thing, very emphatically, and I'm among the very few who do. Yeah? Because, as I said, what you probably all love about the old-style successive cyclic movement derivation is the intermediate touchdown in spec CP. That's what we teach all of our students. I have, over the years, also always taught my students that in order to get out of a clause, you have to land on its spec of CP first. But I myself have long been very strongly disenchanted with that idea, and I have argued against it quite emphatically. So I agree with Chomsky that there is indeed no copy of the WH phrase on the edge of the CP. But I emphatically disagree with Chomsky on everything else that is said, for reasons that I will make clear in a moment. First, why do I agree with Chomsky on B Roman numeral 1, so the idea that there is no copy on the edge of the CP? Well, this is an empirical matter. Here's a very simple reason for thinking that there isn't. Of the very many things that West Ulster English can do with floating quantifier all, the one thing that it can't do is precisely what everybody always teaches their students that it should be able to do, right? Namely, strand all or float all in the position between yesterday and the complementizer. Now, yesterday marks the right edge of the matrix VP. That marks the first physical word of the CP. All should be able to be in the middle of those, and it can't be, right? So the fact that C is ungrammatical tells me empirically, and not just me, but some other people who have looked at these data with interest, that there is indeed no stopover on the edge of the embedded CP. But C is bad, but D and E are good, so there are actually representatives of the WH phrase in the matrix clause. Yeah? There are representatives of the WH phrase to the right of say and to the left of say. Those are arguably both on the edge of the VP with variation depending on exactly where the verb moves, but certainly these are in the matrix clause and they belong to all floating pointifiers, as we all know from work by Sportisch and Jenny Doetjes, for example, must always be local to their associate. So there must be something local to all that represents all, therefore what must be represented in the matrix clause on the edge of the VP. C, in combination with 4, is also problematic. C says that the copy of the WH phrase on the edge of the embedded VP results from terminal movement to this position, and 4, which I copied over from the previous, one of the previous slides, says that features relevant for interpretation are the ones that C sub Q accesses. Now, a very important feature of something that is on the edge of a VP that is relevant for interpretation is topichood. Yeah? When you move something to the edge of a VP terminally, yeah, and that is what Chomsky says you're doing, when you move something to the edge of a VP terminally, you make it a topic. Yeah? We know that very well from the Germanic languages. Yeah? The Germanic languages are exemplary in this respect, scrambling and object shift, scrambling found in West Germanic OV languages, Dutch and German, and object shift in the other Germanic languages minus English. Yeah? Object shift and scrambling have precisely that profile. They are movement to the edge of the VP and they are topic devices. Yeah? Scrambling and object shift create topics out of what they move. So we know that this thing, terminally moved to the edge of the VP, has an interpretive property, namely topichood, and we know that that interpretive property is irreconcilable with the interpretive properties of this. This is a focus. If you want an answer to this question, yeah, so if this is an information question, yeah, then you want your interlocutor to provide a value for the variable that this thing represents. If this thing is a topic, then you don't expect your interlocutor to reply to that question. Right? So obviously, this must be a request for new information, therefore, who must be setting the interlocutor up for providing the new information? Who is necessarily a focus in order to make this question meaningful? But then, if there is a copy relation between C sub Q who and WH2, you get a clash. Nothing can simultaneously be a topic and a focus. Yeah? Nothing. There is nothing that can be simultaneously a topic and a focus. So this cannot be true either. So the proposal that Chomsky presents in the mirror concrete paper is certainly a proposal. I don't think we need to split. What do you say? What do you split when you are trying to be too picky about something? You split hairs. Right, there we go. We don't have to split hairs about this being a proposal. It's a proposal, but we should also take that proposal seriously, see what the empirical consequences are, and unfortunately the empirical consequences are not very good. Yeah? We have a problem with the idea that there is no representation of the WH phrase in the matrix VP edge, and we have a problem with the idea that there is a copying relationship between the WH in the matrix clause and that silent element adjoined to the embedded VP, which is there via terminal movement. So now I'm going to re-image successive cyclic A-bar movement, basing myself on just a fragment of the typology of A-bar dependencies that I proposed in my 2018 book, which is available at bookstores near you, also on the internet, and I can even provide you with a free copy of it in PDF, which makes it searchable. It's very nice, so then you don't have to read the book manually. You can just do Control F and type in your search term, and then you will know all the instances where I talk about something. That book is recommended, but it isn't widely read. So you will be forgiven for not knowing what I'm about to say. Yeah, it is simply a fact that this book is not widely read. I wish it were more widely read, because then Chomsky would never have proposed the mirror concrete proposal. Anyway, in that book, I present a variety of strategies for forming long-distance A-bar dependencies, and I'll only be taking 2 of those to keep it simple today, but there are others as well. One is one that in a way looks very much like the one that Chomsky proposed, except that it involves genuine long-distance movement in one fell swoop. Yeah? So the idea behind Rakowski and Richards' 2005 is that when the matrix verb takes the subordinate CP as an agree goal, so morphologically agrees with it, then that CP becomes transparent. You don't have to worry about getting out of it anymore. You can do it in one fell swoop. Yeah, that is the upshot of Rakowski and Richards' 2005. That analysis is entirely correct and applicable to 1/2 of Hungarian. Yeah? Hungarian is a rich language, just like Portuguese, but I know Hungarian a little bit better than Portuguese. In Hungarian, WH dependencies can be formed precisely along the lines of Rakowski and Richards' proposal, such that the WH, which is kit in 8, ki plus accusative case, and ki in 9, ki with unmarked nominative case, in one fell swoop from the embedded clause into the matrix clause. We know that this is contingent on agreement between the matrix verb and the CP, because the agreement is morphologically explicit. Odd, the suffix on the matrix verb, is a so-called definite agreement suffix. It marks the second person singular features of the subject, but also the fact that there is a definite object around. Yeah, there is a definite object. What could that definite object be? It can only be the clause, the finite CP. Finite CPs in natural language are treated as definite constituents. Yeah, so the finite subordinate clause is what the verb agrees with. And when the verb so agrees, then the object of the first example, 8, and the subject of the lower clause. And the second example can extract in one fell swoop with retention of their original case, which is accusative in 8 and nominative in 9. Yeah? Accusative in 8 because it's the object of latot, and nominative in 9 because it is the subject of Elliot. Yeah? Subjects in Hungarian finite clauses are nominative just like they are in English. Oh, no, yeah, English is a bad example. German. Okay, so we have here examples of a genuine long-distance A-bar dependency formed in one fell swoop thanks to the fact that there is agreement between the verb in the matrix clause and the CP. And since this is movement out of the subordinate clause, you expect that island effects should emerge, and they do, as you see in 10. Yeah? So 10, A and B are examples of long-distance extraction interfered with by a WH operator in the subordinate clause, which, interestingly, in Hungarian follows the complementizer. That's not something to worry about. Hungarian places these things in the spec of the focus P, not in the spec of the CP, but these things are in an A-bar spec position which intervenes structurally and linearly between the WH operator and its trace, and that ruins the fun in this kind of case. But Hungarian also has this, 11 and 12, where the WH phrase is consistently accusative, even when it is the subject of the subordinate clause. Yeah? This is not surprising. This is interesting. So we have here an example that in English translates as who do you think came? Who do you think came? Not whom do you think came? But Hungarian actually says here, whom do you think came? Yeah? Butlers can say this in English too. Yeah? Whom shall I say is calling, ma'am? Yeah. But butlers aside, English speakers don't say this. So this is Hungarian. It's not just Hungarian, but Hungarian can do this. And note that when this happens, then the verb suddenly doesn't agree with the CP in its complement, because remember, the CP is definite, and this is indefinite inflection. It's still second person, but now it's indefinite inflection. What is it agreeing with? Well, with the WH phrase. The WH phrase kit is an indefinite expression. Yeah? Who is obviously not a definite expression. Yeah? So here we don't have agreement between the verb and the subordinate clause. So this is not a case of extraction from the subordinate clause, and that indeed it isn't is clear from the fact that you don't get island effects. The examples in 13 and 14 are perfectly good. yeah, both with subject extraction in 14 and with object extraction. You can establish a perfectly good long-distance question via this strategy with indefinite agreement on the matrix verb and an invariant accusative on the WH, even when there is what we would say a harmful quantifier, a harmful operator in between what you would think is the base position of that WH element and the WH element itself. So there is no movement out of the subordinate clause in these examples. Yeah? These really aren't cases of long-distance A-bar dependencies. But we do manage to relate the matrix WH element to a gap in the subordinate clause, obviously. So one major task that I'm facing is how that relationship is established. And in my 2018 book, I said that it is established as follows. You form a WH dependency between who and EC3 in the matrix clause. Where exactly EC3 is something I'll come back to. Yeah? But for now, bear in mind that EC3 is base generated in the matrix clause, moves locally to spec of CP, forms a local non-long distance WH dependency there, and it's linked to another dependency which I have explicitly identified as a topic comment dependency, a topic dependency with EC2 as the topic and EC1 embedded inside the comment. Yeah? So this is a topic dependency. In other words, what you have is, as I say above the example, prolepsis come topic drop. Yeah? Prolepsis is what I mean by this. EC3 is a proleptic object in the matrix clause. It is an object that anticipates the coming of the dependency in the subordinate clause. Yeah? It is, as it were, misplaced, but it does have a connection with the dependency in the subordinate clause, and that subordinate dependency is anaphoric to the proleptic object, an anaphoric topic dependency. Yeah? Perfectly natural. Now, what you see in 15 bears a resemblance to 6b, which was the mirror concrete proposal. Yeah? There are clear parallels between 15 and 6b, which is why when I first heard the mirror concrete proposal presented, I thought, blimey, Chomsky did read my book after all. But no, he didn't, because if he had, he would not have had an empty category here. Yeah? And he would not have said that there is a copying relationship between these two. We know that there is no copying relationship between this dependency and this WH. How do we know that with such certainty? Well, just look once again at, at this Hungarian example, 12. Kit gondolsz, hogy eljött. Yeah? What is the case of the WH operator? It is accusative. Does that belong to, or is that a property that could have been copied over from the empty category in the subordinate clause? No, because the empty category in the subordinate clause is nominative. Yeah? So we know very well that this is not a case of copying under some miracle mechanism. So there is no feature copying, but instead an anaphoric dependency, and there is also no information structural clash. So let's go back again to that example in 12. Kit is base generated in the matrix clause as a focus. It has a focus dependency binding a trace in the matrix clause. And then there is a topic dependency in the subordinate clause, which is anaphoric to that matrix dependency, which it is very well allowed to be, because obviously topics can be anaphoric to foci. Yeah? Topics can very well be anaphoric to foci. These are the two main differences between Chomsky's proposal and mine, although there are tantalizing similarities. So overall, still, even today, when I read the mirror concrete paper, I think, not so bad. Certainly better than Chomsky 86 and Chomsky 2001, but not quite right. I think 15 is better. Now, 15 raises a variety of questions, and for the rest of the time, which is how much? 10 minutes?
Well, 15 minutes.
Okay. For the I will try to just do this in 10 minutes. For the remaining minutes, I want to talk a little bit about interesting questions and perspectives that this derivation opens up. Yeah? So now we're going to talk about 15. This was 15. It will come back on the slide many times. Yeah? So you don't have to actually memorize it. I will repeat 15 at crucial points. But I'm going to talk about 15 in some greater detail. One important ingredient of 15 is the assumption that the subordinate dependency is a topic dependency with a silent head. Yeah? The head of the dependency is a topic, but it's not pronounced. In other words, it is a dropped topic. Yeah? And I managed to say it right. First, the dependency in the subordinate clause is a topic dependency. It is headed by a topic, but the topic is not pronounced. In other words, this is a case of topic drop, which I'm surprised at myself. I managed to say this. I didn't say dropic top or something like that. So there was no spoonerism. But this is a case of topic drop. Yeah? And topic drop is known to exist in languages. Dutch has it, as you see in 16b. So if someone asks you, may I offer you this book? And you want to say, I've read this book already, then you can actually just say, read it. I've read already. Yeah? You can drop the topic perfectly well. Hungarian can do topic drop as well, although you need to do a little bit of work to establish that. But I think in the context of this particular ensemble of people, I will skip that. But Hungarian B, 18b, tells you that Hungarian has topic drop as well. But English doesn't. So does this mean that 15 is not usable in English? Right? In English you clearly can't say, in reply to, may I offer you this book, I read already. Yeah? I read already is not a well-formed utterance in English, unless you want to say that you have done reading in general. Yeah? Which is not an appropriate reply to the question. Right? And so, this is the question. Does this mean that 15 is not available in English? That is what I initially thought. So I thought, okay, English is not a topic drop language. The derivation in 15 involves topic drop. Therefore, English probably doesn't have it. That may explain why English is so difficult when it comes to long-distance A-bar dependencies. But that turned out not to be true. So English must actually allow topic drop, at least when explicit anaphoricity is involved within a single complex utterance, because there are clear advantages to the derivation in 15 also in English. And I will present you with the clear advantages to the derivation in 15 in English, so that you will then perhaps be convinced with me that 15 exists in English, that we do still have to worry about why English cannot say 19b, of course. So, one thing that I think the derivation in 15 is very useful for is for explaining the gradation of the WH island effect. Empirically, at least, we can make serious headway with respect to that. It has long been known, since Ross 1967, as a matter of fact, that not all WH island effects are equally severe. These are Ross's own judgments for 20 for WH islands. He told me about a book which I can't figure out why he read, which I can't figure out whether he read, and which I can't figure out when he read. Now, Hadge was very, very honest about data. Yeah? Hadge was extremely honest about data. And so, as you know, his dissertation, Constraints on Variables and Syntax, is famous for having inventoried a whole range of island effects. And in introductory textbooks, the WH island effect is often attributed to Ross as well. But it wasn't Ross who proposed the WH island effect, because Ross emphatically did not believe that subordinate WH questions are invariably islands, as you can see in 20. So Ross, in his own judgment, found 20a absolutely perfect. Yeah? There is an intermediate WH, namely Y, but there is no island effect. Yeah? And 20b is also not so bad for Ross. 20c gets worse, and eventually, if you make your way down the spectrum, and if you get crossing as well, then things really get bad. But eventually, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. But in the beginning, in the A and B examples, it really isn't bad to have a dependency across an intervening WH. And here you might have thought, okay, weather is different, because weather doesn't bind the trace. But Y does bind the trace. Yeah? It must, because otherwise it cannot modify anything. So the exact question of why the judgments that Ross reports go the way they go has always remained somewhat mysterious. But what is interesting from the perspective of 15 is that the syntax of a long-distance A-bar filler gap dependency on the analysis in 15 involves a topic dependency in the subordinate clause, and then a proleptic WH dependency in the matrix clause. And that topic dependency can of course also be overtly established in principle inside a WH clause, and when you try to do that you get 21 and you get the same line of judgments. This book in the examples at 21 is the contrastive topic of the subordinate clause, explicitly contrasted with another set of books, and the line of judgments in 21 is exactly the same, just exactly the same as it is in 20. So I can't figure out why this book he did read, while those other books he didn't. It's just fine. The second example, I can't figure out whether this book he did read, but the other books he didn't, is somewhat less good and really quite poor, roughly equally poor as 20C. I can't figure out when this book he read and the other book he didn't. Yeah? So there is the same line of judgments in 21 that you also find in 20. Now, providing an explanation for that Klein is something I'm not going to offer, but what I can offer is a direct parallel or assimilation of 20 and 21. Because on the analysis of 20 as in 15, there is indeed a direct parallel between 20 and 21. Because this topic dependency in 21 is an integral part of the derivation of 20. You first form that topic dependency, we make it anaphoric to a proleptic WH dependency. So the topic dependency is part and parcel of the derivation of 20, so no wonder that 20 and 21 behave alike. That is one indication that probably English does have 15, and that 15 makes very good predictions. Another indication that 15 is good for English is that English cannot translate these Hungarian examples at all. You might have looked at these Hungarian examples before and thought, what on earth is going on in those examples in 14? I can't translate them into English. Indeed, you can't. You can't say, who did you ask when came? You can't say, who did you ask if came? These are dreadful. Why are these so much worse than these? These are in English also not very bad. Why are these so dreadful? The answer is, A, vacuous topicalization is universally illicit, and B, English is not a pro-drop language, whereas Hungarian is. So what you can't do in a syntax of the type in 15 is to have EC1 in the local subject position and EC2 in the spec top P. There is too little distance between those two. This would be anti-local, if you know that term. You cannot have a topic dependency that is footed in the structural subject position and headed in the spec of top P. That is illegal. Yeah? That is just not kosher. Since vacuous topicalization of subjects is illegal, and since English also doesn't have pro-drop, there is no way in which in English the translations of 14a and b could succeed, because you can't drop the topic and you can't drop the subject, so you can't have silence in the embedded subject. Hungarian has pro-drop, so Hungarian does get away with these things. That is why English and Hungarian are different. English is not a pro-drop language, Hungarian is. Secondly, the dat trace effect falls out very beautifully, in fact I would say truly elegantly, from the derivation in 15. I already mentioned that vacuous topicalization is illicit, so in that light, vacuous topicalization cannot be performed in 22a. You cannot move from here to here, then drop the topic. You also can't leave the subject in situ and make it a little pro. So for, 22a simply has no legitimate derivation based on 15. But if you bake some distance in between EC1 in the structural subject position and EC2 in the topic position, if you bake some distance between these two so that topicalization is no longer vacuous, you expect the effect of the dat trace filter to go away. And that we have long known. Yeah? This is usually attributed to Peter Kalikover, although this observation is older than Kalikover. I think it may actually have already been in Ross's dissertation. But certainly Kalikover is usually credited with this observation. It is a robust fact that 22b is much better than 22a is. And there have been all sorts of shenanigans in the literature about how to derive this, but I think this falls out extremely simply from the fact that there is a ban on vacuous topicalization in English. 22a is then not derivable, 22b is a simple matter because their topicalization is not vacuous. Yeah? There is something in between EC1 and EC2, namely for all intents and purposes. Okay, so this was to show that English probably does have 15. Then there are some more questions about 15, just 2 more, and we are almost done. One is, how is the WH in the matrix clause, which is EC3, how is that licensed? How is it case licensed? Empirically, the answer that Hungarian gives is that it is case licensed with accusative case, and where is that case coming from? If you survey the entire territory of different verb types and different cases that they assign, it becomes crystal clear that that case is coming from the matrix verb. So it is the matrix verb that is responsible for assigning case to this WH element. And that explains, Gesundheit, why that WH element is consistently the same in form with this verb, no matter what the function of that WH might be in the subordinate clause. It doesn't get case in the subordinate clause. The dropped topic gets case in the subordinate clause. The matrix WH gets case from the verb. So there must be some sort of a dependency establishable, or case assigning dependency establishable between the matrix verb and that WH. And in 6b, there is simply no way to do that. In 6b, who is externalized in spec of CQ, but it was never a constituent of the matrix clause. It was never inside the core of the matrix clause. It was just externalized in spec of CP, thanks to that feature copying relation between C sub Q and the embedded dependency, but the WH was never born as an integral part of the subordinate clause, of the matrix clause. So it could not have got case from matrix verb. But in 15, EC3 is linked to who. EC3 is in a position C commanded by the matrix verb, or at least it can be, and when it is, then it can get case from the matrix verb. So licensing the WH for case is also not difficult. But then we get to the really interesting question. If the WH is merged in the matrix, in the object position of the matrix verb, then where is the clause? Where is the subordinate clause? Right? That is perhaps the most tantalizing question that we are now left with. We have done a lot of wonderful work. Well, I think it's wonderful. You might disagree. But we've done a lot of work, and some of you might agree with me that it's wonderful. But there is this really remarkable question now suddenly on our plate. If the WH element in the matrix clause, in these 15 type derivations, is the object of the matrix verb, then where is the subordinate clause? We would have thought that the subordinate clause is the object of the matrix verb. How can the verb have 2 objects? It's not ditransitive. The verb to think is certainly not a ditransitive verb. You cannot think someone something. It's impossible. So where is that CP? How do we integrate that CP? I'm skipping one slide here, which is interesting if you want to know more about these kinds of constructions, but I suspect not. What I'm going to go straight to is 26. 26 is my solution. So this is a Larsonian structure, 26. Does the term Larsonian VP structure mean anything to you? Have you heard this before? So it's a layered VP where the complement and the spec are both occupied. And there can be a relationship, as Hale and Kaiser have argued, between the element in the complement position of the verb and the element in the specifier position of the VP. Namely, the verb and its complement can form a complex predicate that is jointly predicated of the element in spec of VP. That happens in Hale and Kaiser's story all the time for sentences like John put the book on the shelf. We were just talking about that. And also John gave the book to Mary. Form a complex predicate, verb plus complement, jointly predicated of the theme in the spec position of the VP. And that is precisely what's going on here. Although you would scratch your head and think, how can a CP possibly be forming a complex predicate with the verb? CPs are ordinarily fully saturated, therefore not predicable of anything. Yes, but these are CPs in 15 that have a topic drop dependency inside them. So there is a dependency inside that embedded CP that is not fully saturable, not fully saturated. The CP remains essentially open because of the fact that the topic dependency there is not equipped with an overt topic, an overt range assigner to that dependency. So that EC 2 EC1 dependency, has no range assigned to it. It is a free-range chicken, as you might say, and is therefore not fully saturated and can, together with the verb, be predicated of the proleptic object, which we are now saying has the property of being the one that the subject thought that Mary kissed. Yeah, the one that the matrix subject thought that Mary kissed. And indeed, that is precisely what who is, and who do you think that Mary kissed? Yeah? That who is the individual of which it holds that it is the person that Mary thought of as the one that that I thought of as the one that Mary kissed. So it is the subject of the complex predicate, think that Mary kissed. Yeah? That is what who is. And that's precisely what you want. And that makes 26, which is an integral part now of 15, these are actually the same, that makes 26 very similar to a tough movement construction. There too, you have an embedded clause, an infinitive in this case, that is unsaturated because of the fact that it has an A-bar dependency established inside it, a null operator dependency, to which no range is assigned. And because no range is assigned to that dependency, the infinitival clause, this CP, becomes a predicate. It becomes a part of a predicate, more particularly, together with the tough adjective, tough plus CP forms a complex predicate, which is predicated of the subject. Yeah? So this 26, this derivation is now directly on a par with this derivation. Therefore, who do you think that Mary kissed? And Mary is tough to kiss, become one of a kind. Yeah? They are syntactically on the derivation 15, one of a kind. To sum up, very briefly, what I have shown is that there are certain parallels between Chomsky's miracle creed proposal and my 2018 book, but there are also important differences. The two important parallels are that both of us eschew, that's a nice word, I always like to say this, it really literally sounds like you're sneezing, both of these literally eschew successive cyclic movement via spec of CP, and both establish an identificational relationship between a WH element externally merged in the matrix and some dependency in the subordinate clause. Those are the two major points of agreement, and those are fundamental and really important points of agreement. But differences reside in the base position of the matrix WH operator, which for Chomsky is spec of CP. It doesn't come from anywhere. It is the only place where it ever was is the place where it's pronounced, not for me. Second, the nature of the relation between the matrix WH operator and the silent element, a topic in the subordinate clause. For Chomsky, that's feature copying, which it ostensibly cannot be, because then you get an information structural clash. For me, it is anaphora. Third, the relation established between the matrix WH operator and the subordinate CP. For Chomsky, that's not specified. He doesn't talk about it, but for me, it is predication. And finally, the position occupied by the silent A-bar moved element in the embedded clause. For Chomsky, that's the object shift position. For me, it is a topic position in the high left periphery of the CP. That last part is not such an important difference. The other three are much more important. Finally, at a more general level, this proposal that I presented to you today is only a small fragment of a larger typology of A-bar filler gap dependencies that I proposed in my 2018 book. So this isn't all, this is not all there is. Yeah? There is more, and therefore, obviously, everything that I said should be carefully considered against the background of the fact that there is more, whereas Chomsky would like us to believe that there isn't more, yeah? But there is plenty more. And finally, for, one thing that I think we can agree on as something that Chomsky and I can shake hands on, which is good, right? It's always good to be able to shake hands with Chomsky on something, namely long A-bar filler gap dependencies are really and truly never cases of successive cyclic movement. Yeah? They really and truly never are that. You don't move successive cyclically. You can have multiple empty categories, but there isn't successive cyclic movement from the lowest point to the highest point successively. And these are my references. The things that I refer to prominently are also on the list. This one in particular. And Chomsky 2024, the Miracle Creed paper, which has by now appeared in a Festschrift for Andrea Moro. You are welcome to read the Chomsky 2024 paper. You are in fact encouraged to read the Chomsky 2024 paper. It is in fact not so hard to read, unlike barriers, for example. But use a moment when you feel inclined to be skeptical, yeah, when you read this paper. Don't just swallow it as the Bible, because it isn't. Thank you.